Hello, everyone. I thought I would tell you a little bit more about my book, Silent Reckoning. Now, I hope people don't think that as you're reading this that it's supposed to that you're supposed to imagine a silent film in your head, because even though it takes place during the 1920s, in 1929, during the transition between silent films and sound film, it's not supposed to be a silent film. Sound is very important in Silent Reckoning. The reason why it's called Silent Reckoning is, for one, because it was made during the end of the silent era, so silent, is appropriate. But also, it's about Silent Reckoning means it's a reckoning of the mind, of the soul. It happens inside, and that's the meaning of the title. And of course, the book is about an actress during the 1920s. She's an aging actress. Even though she's not really that old, she's only about 36. But then, actresses in their mid to upper 30s were considered, quite often expendable. And and she's trying to make the transition from silent films to sound films. But the thing is, though, is that it's not that she doesn't have a good voice. I want to make that clear. Some actors couldn't make the transition because they were had accents that were sounded foreign, which American producers worried about that then. But it wasn't that. It was more that she came off a bit too theatrical, and a lot of producers then wanted something that was a bit more naturalistic. She was kind of like Gloria Swanson. Gloria Swanson had a good voice, but she was a bit too melodramatic. Although I will say that the character of Jeannie Anderson is somewhat based on the lives of several different actresses from the time period, including Myrna Loy. In terms of looks, she kind of looks like Myrna Loy. She and also her life was based somewhat off of the actress Lila Lee, who's not really very well known. She was probably most famous for being in the sound version of the Unholy Three. Lila Lee was also in Blood and Sand, and she was a silent film actress who made some films in the early 30s, but then her career kind of dwindled. In the early 30s, there were actresses who had that kind of melodramatic tone, but then that was kind of phased out by the mid late 30s. Among American actors, there were foreign actresses like Greta Garbo, who had that kind of melodramatic mystique. But when it came to a lot of American actors, there were exceptions. There was a need for a kind of artificial naturalism. The transatlantic accent was a thing, but in terms of like facial expressions, in terms of facial expressions, they wanted some things that people to behave more naturally. They didn't want these long pauses of dramatic facial expressions. That was something that was considered antique by the mid 1930s. Um, but again, she's trying to make the transition to sound, but she's worried about her career. And then there's this. She meets Walter Peterson, who is this fan who thinks that he can, who is kind of obsessed with her, and he thinks that he can revitalize her career. And therefore, they turn to this critic, this who was initially critical of Jeannie Anderson, but now he thinks he wants to help them. But there's a plot, a mystery, and a plot twist behind the identity of the critic. And one of the interesting things about Silent Reckoning is that told in it's told in both first person and third person. About 75% of it is written in third person, but 25% is written in first person. And this was the first time that I started to experiment with first person, which led me to write my next book, The Ecstasy and the Ignominy, entirely in first person, because I think it worked out well here. And there's one chapter where I transition and go back and forth between third person and first person. It's very experimental in that sense, because there's this sense of the characters breaking through the narrative itself and coming to life and overpowering the third person narrator. And so I experiment in Silent Reckoning very much with form and style. Um, and it's basically a personal character study, a tragedy about what happens when people have had a traumatic past like Jeannie Anderson had, because there are flashback sequences where you transition between the present, which is often in third person, and the past, which is often in first person, and you see how her past ultimately comes to affect the present, and it all ultimately leads into a very, I think, dramatic climax. And so that's just some of inspiration about Silent Reckoning. Of course, you have the cover, which was inspired by The Great Gatsby with the eyes, and there's a scene where the characters are in go to a place very much like Coney Island, you know, and it's probably one of the best scenes in the the book. It's more of a dramatic romantic scene, and so that's just some information about Silent Reckoning. It was inspired somewhat by The Great Gatsby. In terms of style, there's a little bit of William Faulkner, a little bit of Dickens, who I was reading at the time. It almost has kind of more of a Dickensian feel, even though it does take place in the 1920s. But it has what I would call that kind of epic scale to it. So, so that so so Silent Reckoning, I do consider to be probably the best book that I've written thus far. I mean, that's been published thus far. The Ecstasy and the Ignominy, in some ways, is a better book. In some ways, perhaps not, depending on how you look at it. I do think Silent Reckoning is a very concise book, where everything kind of fits, I think, well together. So that's why I recommend reading it.